Before we begin today's wrap-up episode of Season 6, I'd like to express sincere thanks to all of our wonderful guests who shared their time, their energy, their wonderful wisdom with me. I'd also like to thank you, importantly, all of our wonderful listeners spanning right across the globe. As ever, a huge thanks for all the really positive feedback, and I want to just share some of that with you. Fantastic series. I love listening to these podcasts. Brendan has delivered a broad range of inspirational guests with fascinating insights into business and personal mindsets. A listener commenting on the Alice Thompson episode, very revealing and honest, loved it. And then another listener, a must listen, my favorite business focused podcast. I have tuned into all 6 seasons of ScaleX Insider, and it is one of the best podcasts that I have listened to. So much so, I have re-listened to many of the episodes. Brendan is a phenomenal interviewer and the guests are incredible, would highly recommend. That's very, very kind, and that's not from my mother, it's from Ash McLean. So without further ado, Claire, you are very welcome to the ScaleX Insider podcast. Great to have you back.
Thanks for having me, as always.
It's incredible
Great to be back.
Yeah, it's incredible to think it was August, the start of August, when we wrapped up season 5, a wonderful season 5. You're looking very refreshed and well as you enter into the last quarter of the year. I know you've just come back off a wonderful holiday, so I'm really excited to share the show with you today. So
brilliant! Thank you so much. It has been terrific, and yes, it's always great to be able to hit the refresh button as you come towards the end of the year. I can't believe it was August since the last time we spoke. So certainly in the show anyway, but the year's gone fast.
It really has. And we were reflecting before we started recording what a year it has been in the context of the show. I am so privileged to be ringside seat to the wonderful guests that we have, the wisdom that they share, and again, I was saying this is like a real life MBA, and the guests in season 6 have just been phenomenal. So, kicking off as we typically do, what were some of your reflections from season 6?
Season 6 was another absolutely mind-blowing season. Some fantastic guests. Again, so much, just as you've said there, so much learning, so many insights. And it's a real privilege to be able to listen to people who are experts in their area and who've been there and done it. I have to say, taking an aerial view, I absolutely loved the wisdom that we all received from Jim Lear. I think I probably took most notes down whenever I was listening to James Kerr. Again, I really enjoyed the stories that Brian Keane told. You know, Brian Keane, I can tell whenever we're listening, Brian Keane and I are probably wired different ways, but I absolutely loved, one of your the reviews you read out there was around the humility and vulnerability of your guests, and I got that from Brian and loved the story he told about bringing his mother into the business, and actually, because he was hyper focused, a term I don't hear very often, but hyper focused on the number for his business, he ended up lashing out at those around him that he loved the most. So again, loved hearing those stories from Brian. Jodie was phenomenal. I've got to say, as a systems thinker myself, I love her structure. I've recognized as someone who's on the scaling journey right now, as we are with our own business, Simple Scaling, that, you know, out of her 4 stages, I really enjoyed listening to her 4 stages and really recognized that we're in that systemizing stage ourselves. So really enjoyed that. And probably the last reflection on the season, Chris Voss. I loved his, I just loved his honesty. And, you know, one of the things that stuck in my mind the most when he called out a term that we've got very familiar with, active listening. And he said, it's not active listening, it's actually listening. And I just loved that. So all of the guests, you know, from start to finish were brilliant. But, you know, as you said there, you know, just coming back from a holiday and you've got that extra time to think. And I too reflected over all of the seasons from 1 right through to 6. And the amount of learning, and as you know, at the end of every wrap up, I take away a commitment in terms of what I can do to be better. And I thought back to Damien Hughes, who introduced the pre-mortem. I use that pre-mortem now in a lot of workshops that I run, with the view of increasing the resilience levels of the companies that we're working with. And as Damien said, the research shows that by carrying out a pre-mortem, you can lift that by 30%. Kingsley Aiken was another one I reflected on, and I've never really enjoyed networking as I used to know it. Whereas how Kingsley put that in context really helped me to embrace networking. And I go into events now without that fear, that horrible feeling in my stomach. And I walk into a room now thinking I'm just here to make friends, and I have a much better experience. And that's down to Kingsley. And, between carving out thinking time as suggested by Maura Neville Thomas, or getting back into reading something that I always have to work at. But John Spence talked about getting back to reading. But I have to say, probably one of the most liberating and insightful experiences I've had was inspired by Kevin Schulman. And he really inspired me to define my own personal vision and put more definition around my own personal purpose. And it was great to hear from Jim Lear that you don't get it and it's set in stone. It's something that you always have to go back and keep reviewing. And that was a great experience. So thank you to ScaleX Insider, thank you Brendan McGurgan, and thank you to all the guests, because the learning and the journey that we've been on over the past year has been absolutely brilliant, really brilliant.
Yeah, I have to say I'm loving it, and I come away. There are some episodes where I literally have to go and lie down. Larry Hatch, who opened up the season, was one of those. His power of language and his use of language, he uses every word like he's spending $100. It's so carefully crafted, and he's just a master at actually listening and articulating the point in relation to the direct question. There's no doubt that all of the guests spoke to the 10 principles from our ScaleX 10 principle framework, but undoubtedly there were clear emerging themes for me. What were the emerging themes for you, and the principles certainly that re-emerged time and time again, given even the breadth of the guests that we hosted?
Well, if I think in terms of our own ScaleX framework, our 3 phases are inspire, and then orientate, and then accelerate. And I think all of the emerging themes for me all fell into the inspire phase. And I guess as I talk through them, I'll go into each one at a time. But the emerging themes, and when I say emerging things, these themes came up time and time again across all of the guests. One of which was becoming irrelevant, was the first one that I heard multiple guests talk about. The second one was around vulnerability. And I can't be the only person that's noting this amazing wave of vulnerability that seems to be sweeping the globe, I think at the moment, not just the nation. But the third theme really that started to come through was around state. A number of your guests mentioned the word state, and it's a term, I guess, that I'm hearing more and more often, and how we can then take action to find balance. And I'll go into that in a little bit more detail. And then the fourth theme for me that was coming through was our ability to tell great stories. And I guess, our inspire phase of our ScaleX framework covers the psyche of the leader, the purpose and vision of the organization and the leader, and then people. And I guess storytelling as a theme really comes into play whenever we're looking at articulating our purpose and our vision, and doing it in a way that we can capture the hearts and minds of people around us. So those 4 themes to me were coming through really, really strongly across the whole season.
Yeah, again, very strong for me as well. So let's start with, let's dig into state, what we would refer to in the context of our ScaleX 10 principle framework as psyche, more commonly referred to as mindset. So, these terms are used interchangeably. But so what came through for you in regards to state, Claire?
Well, I guess there was a number of speakers and they probably termed it differently. So Jodie Cook, for example, she talked about our lower state and our higher state, and she actually asked the question, who's winning the game? So whenever we can stop and acknowledge and recognize our when we're in a lower state or we're in a higher state, is really important. James Kerr, he used the example that they talk about within the All Blacks, the red hat, whenever we're feeling a little bit choked up or we're under pressure. And then the blue hat, whenever we're feeling in the moment, and how getting ourselves into the environment where we can be in the moment leads us to making better decisions. And the chances of our success are greater. Jim Lear, maybe this does actually incorporate states. He talks about, although he talks about it in the terms of a voice, our public voice and our private voice. And really what he's saying there is, what are the bits that we're willing to share with others, and what are the parts that we're actually pretty much more comfortable keeping within ourselves. So Cyril also talked about state, but his angle was slightly different because he talked about how our brains can sometimes become a little bit lazy and we tend to think in patterns. So actually to think creatively and think of new ideas, sometimes we need to break those patterns, break that state in order to open up our minds and to think a little bit differently. So
Yeah, and just on that, this was something that came through for me in relation to the understanding of how energy is actually leveraged, and the penny dropped in relation to the understanding of energy being finite. And Jim made the point that we are stingy as humans. We are stingy with our energy, and there's a clear reason for that. That's self-preservation. If we go down, go back tens of thousands of years ago, those who preserved the most energy, and as Larry Yatch used the term, made sure they had deposits into their self-regulation, or let's say energy piggy bank, would ultimately help to preserve their survival. And this is why we create habits. And this is, we can get into, we talk about the quote came up, from Aristotle, give me the boy for the first 7 years and I'd show you the man. At that point, the boy is in theta state and is mimicking what he sees in terms of his parents or guardians and the environment that he or she is operating within. And ultimately that creates the habitual behavior to support their survival. But if we don't understand what habits are actually being programmed in those early years, then ultimately we have no guarantee in terms of whether they're serving us or not. But that helped me really understand the importance of the reason why we have habitual behavior in the first instance is to preserve energy. If we had to waken up every morning and think, okay, how do we put our socks on? What shoes go on which foot? What way do we brush our teeth again? You'd be exhausted by the time you'd finish brushing your teeth. And so there are habits. The reason for habits, Mother Nature is very clever in terms of helping preserve energy. So once we have those habits ingrained, we don't want to change them, which was Cyril's point in terms of, we become lazy. Lazy being that the self-preservation mechanism kicks in. What really struck me then was the importance of purpose and meaning in your work from Jim's interview, to actually help unlock those reserves of energy which we're holding on to and we're stingy with because we don't know when we're going to have to fight the tiger that's outside the cave in terms of our mammalian brain. And so I found that absolutely fascinating, brought clarity, given that he's a profound psychologist, clarity as to the reason why habits are there in the first instance, why we preserve energy, and how then to unlock energy, and the and that all tied back to psyche and to our state.
Completely. And actually, do you know, most of us, whenever we think about energy, we go to physical energy. And, Jim gives us that great framework to operate from, emotional energy, mental energy, spiritual energy, and physical energy. And I love the point that Jim made was the highest quality of energy comes from our positive emotions, like belief, like optimism, like joy. And we know, even spending time with people who are maybe not necessarily completely aligned with our values, we know how it makes us feel whenever we're listening to the news, and it's there's a lot of doom and gloom there, or whenever we engage with somebody who just seems to zap our energy from us.
Yeah.
And actually, it really reinforces the importance of surrounding people who bring us energy, but also creating those, as you said there, those habits and rituals that will actually give us more energy.
Yeah, well, if you go back to the Inspire theme and the three principles aligned to this Inspire theme within our ScaleX Insider framework, the etymology of inspire is from the Latin inspirare, which means to breathe life into. And ultimately, it's understanding that you must get yourself into a state, ensuring that your psyche is actually orientated to scale, and from that understanding that your inputs actually shape your outputs. So when you mention environment, Claire, who is in your environment? Who's in your front row seat, as I talk about? Who are those radiators? Are they close to you, or have you surrounded yourself with too many drains? What are you listening to? What are you reading? Hopefully, you're an avid listener of the ScaleX Insider podcast at this point. This is helping to shape, these inputs are helping to shape and mold and form your psyche, your state, which then actually helps you to begin to do the work to unveil your purpose. And your vision is the ultimate expression of that purpose. But if actually you're feeding yourself with or surrounding yourself with negative people, listening to I can't even abide the theme music of EastEnders. I don't want. If you watch an episode of EastEnders, you're not going to come away from that inspired to set a world-beating vision. You're simply not, and that's a recognition of that. Well, this doesn't serve my emotional state. So, be very clear, on what from a listener perspective, that the thread that's coming through from all the listeners is the game is played in your psyche, in your mindset, in your state. So, Claire, I love that, and it's something I keep coming back to time and time again. Because it's the first principle of our ScaleX Insider ScaleX framework for a reason. You talked about stories, and this feeds into purpose and vision, the story that we're telling ourselves, and also the story that we're creating for the future. So give me the insight that you gleaned in relation to stories.
Yeah, well, again, there was a number of people that talked about storytelling. Carmine Gallo, his whole talk was about helping us to structure our stories in a way that were more engaging. He talked about our ability to tell stories, that ancient device that connects us all as human beings. James Kerr talked about it's the most important asset that we have to capture hearts and minds. And actually, thinking back to Carmine, so Jim Lear said it as well. Jim Lear talked about writing. He was talking about it with regards to journaling and the connection that, the simple act of writing something and how it connects with that command center in our mind. And also, Carmine talked about it as in the importance of really showing our true understanding as opposed to looking at a number of bullet points up in a PowerPoint presentation. And it actually took me back to my school days, and I love to write. I love putting words together and actually seeing the impact of putting a nice paragraph together and what it can do. And I think back to it was my A-level year, and I was one of two people who selected to study home economics for for 2 years. And I'll never forget it. Actually, my teacher was called Miss Campbell, and she was fairly tough. Unfortunately, she's passed away now, but she was very tough at the time. And myself and my other student, a girl called Lucy, we pretty much got one-on-one mentoring for 2 years. And I didn't enjoy it at the time, but every time I wrote an essay, Miss Campbell sent me away back with my tail between my legs saying, write that again, answer the question. And I did it so many times. By the end of 2 years, I think I was worn down. But actually, I now attribute my love of writing to her actually encouraging me to focus in on answering the question and developing my writing skills through that. So yeah, I mean, I get the importance of writing, and it's different. Writing something down is much different than reading something, or as Carmine rightly pointed out, presenting it in PowerPoint. Sometimes that's our only option, but the importance of having those two skills, storytelling and actually writing, I get is just really important as a way of conveying our message. And you actually, you set the listeners a task, which I will accept this challenge, by defining our own story using the three acts that Carmine called out: the setup, the challenge, and then the resolution. So I think that's a really great thing to do.
Yeah, and stories is very much aligned to your state. What story are we telling ourselves? Are we on a loop about some negative situation that has happened in the past that we constantly have on repeat,
Right.
which is actually limiting our ability to craft a wonderful vision, a story of the vision that you want for the future. Because typically what we want, or what we're doing, is replaying that story from the past, which you're trying to get resolution on, in the hope that actually it's not going to repeat itself in the future. But the very fact that you're constantly have it on loop means that it keeps coming up time and time again. So I think there's two aspects. That one is the story that we're telling ourselves in terms of serving our state, and the other aspect is actually the story that you're presenting to yourself and to your team, in terms of inspiring them to want to go with you. So, when we understand the vision that you set is the story that you're telling of this future desired state, which is the fullest expression of your purpose, at the point in which you share that story, it's so critically important that you're inspired by that story. And as Carmine said, you can't over communicate it.
No, absolutely. He says when you get tired of saying it, say it again.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I think it's our story is often different to what we think it is. And actually, I think that's a whole journey to go on in itself. Sometimes, and again, it's probably back to purpose. Sometimes we listen to people describing their purpose and probably the purpose of their company to us, but actually, it takes you to start to keep peeling back the layers, or getting people to take a different perspective on your story before you start to get to the nub of what the story is really even all about.
We know that just in terms of the human species, we're inspired by stories, the images of the kind of sitting around the campfire, celebrating your kill as you cook it over that campfire, and sharing stories of the expedition to actually, kill this evening's meal. Those stories, the ability to tell stories and to receive those and be inspired and emotionally moved by those stories is just embedded in our state, in our psyche. So ensure that you're telling the story of the future that you want, and be inspired by that, and in terms of that, inspire others. So yeah, the stories is wonderful. Just before we leave that, the conversation with Carmine reminded me of a conversation we had with our own editor during the writing of her book, the wonderful John Hearn, who said, look, now, whenever we presented the manuscript, he said, okay, yeah, now every word must fight for its place. So, and I thought that's such profound advice. It's advice that has stuck with me. And, you know, is there a better way to say, can I remove, if this sentence is 14 words, how can I take half, remove half of it and say something more succinctly and more
Yeah.
powerfully with less words?
Yeah.
And in that process, it helps you to become clearer in the message that you're trying to say yourself. So
I agree. I actually think, we often talk about a well-used strength sometimes becomes a weakness. Sometimes, and I fall into this trap as well, I find myself maybe almost over-engineering something for with the desire to make it simple, and sometimes it goes the
yeah,
other way. So it's actually a balance to get just right there, isn't it? Whenever
completely
you're
agree.
writing.
Vulnerability, yeah, this showed up a lot.
Yes, it really did, and I love it. I actually, I think Alice Thompson is really charging the way on this, but I hear it more and more often. You spoke at a conference recently. You were on stage with 4 or 5 other speakers, and the level of vulnerability, actually courageous, very courageous vulnerability, was intense. And it's something that I'm hearing more and more often, and I think it's so incredibly healthy and very brave. I think once upon a time vulnerability may be seen as a weakness, but vulnerability is definitely very courageous, and for that I just wanted to say thank you to Alice Thompson for being so open, for being live on your podcast talking about having a full-scale mental breakdown at the age of 26, how she developed her crutch, but also how she then overcame that and how she worked her way through it. And I loved the openness, I loved the transparency, I loved the learning that she got along the journey. And I think that in itself has inspired many people, myself included, to actually, be more open, be transparent, be vulnerable, because who else is sitting in a room listening to you? If you are a speaker, who's sitting in the room listening to you, feeling exactly the same way? And all of a sudden, it's just another reminder that we're all human. We're all on this wonderful journey. Jim Lear talked about it as well in terms of, it wasn't quite the word he used, but one of my favorite quote of mine is, we're all just walking each other home. We're all in this journey together. So I think the more vulnerable, if you can embrace your vulnerability, you're going to be a better version of yourself, because you're going to learn along the way. So thank you to Alice for that. Again, I've already talked about Brian Keynes. I saw it with him as well. And I think the fact that he admitted that he was hyper focused on achieving that number, and how he provided an opportunity for his mother and then ended up lashing out at his mother because he became unbalanced because of that pursuit of the achievement of the number. And I love to hear that story as well. Again, very personal, very raw story, I'm sure.
Yeah, here. I'm glad you've called out both the courageous vulnerability of Alice and Brian. Both have to be applauded, and we certainly encourage the listeners to go and check out both of those guests, wonderful guests. Brian has an amazing podcast as well, so yeah,
Brilliant,
check that out.
brilliant. Yeah.
The fourth theme.
Yes, the fourth theme, so becoming irrelevant, and different people called it different things, but again, it was coming through loud and clear, and it was very much linked with letting go. And what we see, certainly in our program, whenever we're working with founders, business leaders, managing directors, one of the greatest challenges is that the ability to let go. And Larry Yatch talked about it. He said our goal is to be irrelevant in both business and in our lives. When we're talking about our kids' lives as well, you don't want them to be too heavily reliant on you, because one day you want to kind of make sure that they've got everything, they're well equipped to kind of leave the nest. And being important isn't the end goal. And whenever we have that desire to hang on to things and make ourselves important, that is stopping us, getting in the way of of us letting go. James Kerr, he also talked about it. The courage of leadership is the courage to let go. And he said something that's lovely, and it really resonated. He said, "Our achievements are woven into the lives of others." And I thought that was great. It was just something that I just really enjoyed. Um, Jodie Cook, while she didn't talk so much about becoming irrelevant, the whole process of systemizing your business. We often use the term "system set you free," which was coined by David Jennings, the author of Systemology. But she very much focused in on whenever we systemize our business can then start to run without us being there. And that's whenever it's really fun and it becomes enjoyable. Whenever people can make decisions, there's systems there to guide people. So yeah, I think Jodie also called something out. She says, the control freak in us is the thing that dives in to stop us from wanting to let go, and that's driven through fear. So again, it's back to really recognizing that we're feeling fearful, and you know, um, Larry Yatch talked about fear as a gift. Never heard that before. I've heard feedback as a gift, fear as a gift, and the whole point is acknowledging that we're feeling fearful, listening to what it's telling us, and then taking some sort of action to correct the course that we're on that's actually stopping us from doing something. So, yeah, becoming irrelevant, being dispensable, letting go, handing things over to people who are just going to take things to the next level is critical, but it's recognizing it's just one of the greatest challenges that leaders of scaling businesses have to face.
Yeah, and it speaks to the wonderful work of our friend and contributor to the show and to our program, Ryan Gottfredson, who has written a great book called Success Mindset. And I've actually interviewed Ryan, which will be previewed in season 7, and for his latest book, The Elevated Leader. And he classifies leadership into mind 1, mind 2, mind 3. Back to that state, the question of state again. And our ultimate goal is to get to a point where we're mind 3 leaders, so I'm just going to tease the listeners with that for the moment. We'll not get into that, but it very much aligns with what you're saying in terms of becoming irrelevant. Doesn't mean that you then walk around the business with your hands in your pockets and your head down in a state of frustration and and a huff. It's about actually letting go so that you're not the bottleneck for your scaling ambition. And ultimately, if we use what Larry mentioned in a parental context, if you don't enable your kids to make decisions, throughout their life, just because they turn 18 doesn't necessarily mean that then they automatically have the ability and capacity and capability to make great decisions. Decisions, the ability to make great decisions is something that you must learn, and to constantly challenge your team, not with jumping in with the solution. And many business leaders, I have been there, I'm guilty of this, want to fix things and jump in immediately with a solution and move on, as opposed to actually listening and encouraging the team member to offer up some options, which then you can discuss. And often when you go through that process, your team member then just learns how you think, and indeed creates an ability to make those important decisions, as opposed to constantly leaning on you to make them. And there's a sense of state there as well. We come back to psyche, where it's a paradox. On one hand, the ego gets stroked when we're asked all the time about how things should be done. And whilst we bemoan it, the ego gets a little massage in the fact that you've been asked and you're providing the solution. But ultimately what we're saying is we want to transcend this to get to the point where ultimately, when you're operating in mind 3, that you're serving the team and the ultimate vision to scale the organization. So I love your themes, Claire.
I think it was, Larry also mentioned about we all have a desire to play a significant role in our own story. And it's understanding what that significant role is whenever you let go. We often talk about, if you're in the bowels of your business, you're in, that you're the decision maker in every decision that's happening within your business. Your journey is going to be slow. In fact, you might not even get off the ground.
Well, you've hit on an important point there as well. It comes up time and time again, and people is the third principle of our Scale X framework. And we often hear from leaders, I'm really struggling to scale. I can't get the people. And then when you start to really examine why, it's because that person, that leader's stuck in the balls of the business, and every decision's being channeled through them, and ultimately, because of that, they're not spending time on developing an expansive vision, which ultimately narrows and impedes the opportunities for the business, for the teams, and for the people who operate within those teams. And great people want opportunities to grow, and they can only have opportunities to grow if you are actually continuing to create them. And I think of the curling analogy here, where you should be out in front of your team, with the brush, clearing that pathway to let that curling ball, go hit the desired end state. Help your team by getting out in front and continuing to clear the path to create the opportunities for them to excel and grow. So I love those themes, Claire. Any messages there that arose that really captured your curiosity? Did you learn anything new? Was there kind of any penny dropping moments, any episodes that had a profound impact? We'll come to what you're going to do differently as a result, but just preceding that, anything there really that you thought, I wasn't aware of that? Or
Plenty, plenty. I guess one, Chris Voss offered something which was almost a layer on top of an understanding that I already had. We often talk about the importance of trust. If you're trying to build a business without trust, it's like building on quicksand. But, trust has always come with time that you spend with others and transparency. And I loved that Chris actually added in predictability. And I thought about situations where I was working with people and the trust wasn't there. It's because I couldn't predict them. Now, probably the predictability comes with the time and transparency, because you just simply, you're getting to know people better. So it was adding in an extra layer into the trust equation. But, I have worked with a CEO in the past who operated under I guess, a cloak of mystery, and liked that cloak of mystery. But what actually happened, the result of that cloak of mystery, meant that people couldn't get to know him very well. They couldn't predict what decisions he would make in his absence, or what would he do in a given situation. So there was a very high level of disruption across the whole leadership and management layer, and it was almost like operating in chaos. I remember going into meetings, at times where people were discussing about a little bit about this guy's background, or just trying to dig a little bit further because they weren't getting the information up front. And that's an almighty mistake, because if you have got people in your organization that wouldn't be able to predict how you would act in a given situation, you've lost a huge opportunity there to really embed, behaviors, guidelines, values, all of that in place. That's in place for a reason, to guide the organization as you're moving forward. But if you don't have that, which is typically driven by the leader, it will be sheer chaos, which is what happened.
Yeah, and you've hit on culture there, and something that really struck me was the conversation with Ron Lovett. Ron came from a very hard-assed background, started off life as a bouncer, and then developed and became the leader, founder of a security company that clearly wasn't doing very well. And the turning point for him was actually recognizing the importance of culture. Now, we, in our own frameworks, aligned to our ScaleX 10 principle framework, we have our ScaleX Navigator, which is that one-page little template, which in the shape of a rocket lays out all of the tools and resources that we encourage our scaling leaders to employ within their business. And culture is the launch pad of that ScaleX rocket. And Ron give that kind of the four keys to developing the culture of the organization. The first was to screen for the values and behaviors that you want. Make sure you get that right at the outset. And we see organizations the likes of Netflix and Scribe, who we've worked with, who have their own culture Bible. They put their values out there so people understand right there. This is the way we do things around here. If this is aligned to the way you do things, then great. If not, don't apply. It's as simple as that. So screen at the outset, on board, celebrate people coming on board. And there's so much we could talk around that in terms, we have leaving dinners for people whenever they've exited the organization. What about a starting dinner for people when they join the organization, and celebrate that. Coaching, he spent a lot of time speaking about the importance of coaching. And I loved something that I learned was the asking the permission of the person that you would wish to coach in a certain situation. Ask them up front, given what I've just saw or given that meeting, would you like some feedback, as opposed to jumping straight in with the feedback.
But I think he also mentioned as well, instead of coaching, he talks about coach privately.
Yeah. Yes, and that comes to the last point: coach privately and then celebrate publicly. So, which I loved those.
I guess we used to always talk, in business as well. Who doesn't love celebrating publicly and calling out great behavior? It's whenever the behavior is not great that becomes more challenging. And our ethos was always to give that little tap on the shoulder to say that's not how we do things around here. And actually, it's probably one of the most challenging things you can do, because you're almost, it's like an attack on somebody's personal values, and then you risk, potentially damaging the relationship as a result of it. So I love the just the simple separation: coach privately and celebrate publicly. Is really impactful. Great.
Claire.
I don't like the sound of this.
There were quite a number of things that came up for me, and I want to, just before I pose this question to you in terms of what you're going to do differently as a result, some of the things that have changed the way I look at scaling. Both Ron and Jody mentioned. Ron talked about gamifying values, so turning the alignment of your values into a game. And for people who want to learn a little bit more about that, I'd encourage them to go back to the episode. And Jody reminded us not to take business so seriously, that business should be fun. And and that for each of the challenges that we encounter, perceive it that you're in a real life video game. And when we recall back to our era of playing video games, you had to break some code to get to the next level. You had to master some new skills, some new competency in order to get to the next level. Every challenge that you are encountering within your business is an opportunity for you to grow personally, for your team to grow, and for your organization to grow. But if you perceive it as something that, per me, this challenge again, then that's going to affect your state. And of course, going back to psyche. But if you can perceive it and go, well, there's something in this that when we overcome this, we're going to be stronger as well. I'm going to be a stronger leader. Team's going to be stronger, and the organization's going to be stronger. And if you view it as a game.
Yeah, I completely agree. And there's not one person that you speak to in any episode of the ScaleX Insider that says scaling a business is easy. Not one. Scaling a business is hard, and it's challenging, and it requires every part of your mind and a lot of physical energy, emotional energy, to try to move forward. But I recall probably about 2 or 3 weeks ago, having listened to Jody Cook's podcasts, and we kind of did an air punch and said we'd got to Donkey Kong level 3 or whatever it was. But it's finding those, and we find them frequently in our business as well. It's finding those little nuggets that have a great impact, not just on what you're doing right now, but on such a wider scale, and implementing them and using those. So yeah, gamifying is great. We do take ourselves too seriously. There's nothing makes my heart sink more than walking into a room full of suits, and yeah, it's life's short. You've got to have fun along the way.
Here, here. So moving into that, and in the context of having fun, what are you going to do differently as a result of listening to season 6? What are you going to action?
Well, I'm really excited about this on the basis that, whenever I did reflect over the year, I've got a long string of things now that I have implemented to make me a better version of myself, which is great. It would be remiss of me not to talk about my commitment from the last time round. Sharon Lecter inspired me whenever she asked the question, when was the last time you did something for the first time? And that made me reflect again on whenever I became 40, all those things that I promised myself to do. So I guess over the summer, I had been quite curious about, I think a lot of the female population, a lot of men as well, are dipping into the cold water now in their shorts and their
They
swimsuits.
certainly should be if they've been following this podcast from the start.
So I'd been watching this for a while, so I was quite curious. So a friend of mine and I bit the bullet in the summertime, and we plunged into the cold water in the month of August, which you might say, gosh, that's pretty easy. But now it's November and the temperature's hovering in around kind of 8 to 10 degrees, and it's definitely getting more challenging. But I have to say, it's probably one of my favorite things I do every week. And I get together, our group has grown bigger. We call ourselves the Bob Chats, because there's no swimming involved. We just bob around in the water and chat. But fantastic for my mental health. We travel down in the car. The crack's great. We all walk into the sea together. Every single thing in my body is telling me, go back to bed or go and enjoy a nice breakfast with your family. Get the hell out of here. But we get into the water, and we have a real sense of accomplishment at the end of every Sunday morning after our dip. We come out of the water feeling absolutely on top of the world.
That's brilliant. And I just want to clarify for our US listeners that having the crack means you're having fun along the way, and getting into the sea in August is a huge challenge, as you're getting into the Irish Sea, not the Pacific Ocean. So well done you. Just to clarify that for the US listeners.
So what I'm going to do, so thanks to Sharon for that. I wrote the commitment, and I'm absolutely loving it. So this time around, this is something that you've done for years and I haven't done. And I've been inspired to do it really off the back of this season, is to start to journal, to explore journaling. I've never done it before. It's actually coincided with a conversation I had with my daughter recently, who had kind of approached me because she was curious about some thoughts and feelings that she was having herself. She's 12 years old, and I encouraged her to get a notebook and started to write them down. And I just really kind of happened at the same time I listened to Jim Lear's podcast, and I thought, well, I'm going to do it with her. So we're going to get our notebooks and start to write down and look for the themes and look for the data and look for the key messages. What's it telling us and what does it really mean? And yeah, so that's my commitment between now and we speak again at the end of January, to greater learning. I loved, was it James Kerr used the term self-inquiry? There's lots of messages reinforcing really the importance of getting to know ourselves better. So
Brilliant.
I'm looking forward to it.
Well, I'd encourage you to look up the work of Julia Cameron and her recommendation around morning pages, where you just write a stream of consciousness, whatever it is. So,
Brilliant. Okay,
so I'm looking forward to following that up, and if you will at that point share some insights in terms of what the journaling has revealed. So well done you.
I definitely will. Brilliant. Thanks.
Before we close, as we pose to all of our guests the timeless takeaways, and there's some incredibly profound wisdom. You know, we've had 30 takeaways again over the course of this season.
Brilliant.
Can you share with our listeners what were your 3 favorite timeless takeaways?
Absolutely, it was tricky. There are so many great ones. My favorite takeaways, first of all, Jodie Cook. Back to Jodie, and this really resonated with me because she says our confidence is a multiplier of everything else we have. Work on it. And it took me back to, in my 20s, whenever I would have walked into a room again full of grey suits, into a boardroom, and very naively I thought the older you became, the wiser you became. And I lacked the confidence to speak up. And actually, a managing director at the time, who was my mentor, used to say the only thing getting in your way is you. So it really had to work on building my confidence. And again, confidence comes with age. But whenever you work on your confidence, everything changes. So loved that takeaway from Jodie. And again, for potentially younger listeners in their 20s and their 30s. That confidence doesn't come so naturally to work on it.
I love that, Claire. And sorry, just to interject for you, you share the other 2 because it brings me back to something that Cyril Gortlivin shared in the importance of nano actions. So what Jodie said, confidence needs evidence. And if you find you're getting stuck in relation to personal and organizational scaling, take the minimum viable action that's going to move you forward now. So, let's say you've set yourself in the context of running, you've set yourself a goal of running a marathon in the next 12 months, and you're really starting to panic in this. Just put your trainers on this evening and walk to the first lamppost, the minimum viable action, these nano actions.
Do you know it's really interesting? I think back, and I know that room that I was walking into. I can visualize it, and a nano action for me. Whenever I opened the door, I normally go everywhere with a big smile on my face, but because I was in a business environment, I thought I've got to drop the smile. Be sensible, be serious, and just get in there. And eventually, I got to the point. A nano action of mine was opening the door and saying, "Gosh, isn't it a terrible day out there?" And I actually got to the point on my journey of confidence where I thought, God, do you know what? They actually value me walking into the room and breaking the ice.
Yeah.
Because I think they all wanted to drop. I think they all actually wanted to crack a smile.
God forbid. But there we go.
Yes.
So I love that. What else have you got then? The two further favorite timeless takeaways from the season?
Well, I've already mentioned my second one is from the wonderful Larry Yatch, who talked about fear as a gift. And again, I've just never seen it like that before. And I think by acknowledging it, listening to what it's telling us, and then taking action. He talked about courage is taking action despite of that. I thought that was great. So again, not letting fears paralyze us and stopping us from taking the action that we know that we want to take. And then my final one, really, my final favorite one was from Chris Voss. And really probably a nice broad one to wrap up this particular chat. The universe is largely on our side. So I just thought that was nice. It was a very positive outlook, and he's right.
I absolutely love those. Claire, the last hour has flown as normal as is usual when we do these wrap-ups, certainly when I host the guests. And I'm conscious that we initially started out to host 40-minute podcasts, and they've just gradually got longer and longer. But it's very challenging when you've got the likes of Dr. Jim Lear in front of you, who has coached 17 world number ones and touched the lives of thousands of people positively, to actually to gain and to harness all of that wisdom in 40 minutes. So whilst I'm apologizing for running over, it's always wonderful to share wisdom, which is ultimately going to enable our scaling ambition. So Claire, thank you so much. I love your smile. I love your energy. Keep it up.
Thank you. Another great episode. I really enjoyed it. So thank you.
Yeah, brilliant. And I will see you again at the end of season 7. I'm really looking forward to kicking off the launch of season 7 at the end of November. Again, a wonderful lineup of incredible guests. So, really looking forward to sharing all of those conversations with you, the listeners. In the meantime, take care.
Keep them coming.